Welcome back, everyone. This will be my full breakdown of the Marvel Morbius movie. There's a lot of Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, Spider-Man Easter eggs, connections to Spider-Man No Way Home, and the new Sinister Six movies that they want to make, so we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos, and careful for spoilers for the Morbius movie if you haven't seen it yet. Most people are talking about the Spider-Man No Way Home crossover, the multiverse connections, and the post-credit scene setting up the Sinister Six movies, and which version of Spider-Man is going to show up in these Venom universe movies. The director already clarified that there is a Spider-Man that does exist in this universe, and we learn who it was pretty soon. Like I said, there are a lot of Easter eggs for all the different versions of Spider-Man, so they have their pick of the litter in terms of which it could be. I'll talk about that during the video too. Morbius is an OG Spider-Man character, that's why Sony had the rights to him. He appeared in the 1970s, created by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane, who do get name drops during the movie. Originally, Marvel wanted to get into the vampire pop culture craze back in the 70s, but the rules for how they made comics back then actually prevented them in that era from using the traditional horror-based vampire characters like Dracula. At the time, Stan Lee had wanted Marvel's version of Dracula. So that's why so much about the Morbius character makes him different than traditional vampires, like daywalking and being a legit anti-hero hating the idea of drinking human blood. The funny connection to what's happening in the MCU now with supernatural creatures, like I'm doing Moon Knight episode videos right now with a lot of supernatural characters. Eventually, rules and restrictions relaxed. Marvel was allowed to use traditional vampire characters like Dracula. Dracula eventually became a Blade character. He gets used a lot in the Moon Knight memes as well. MCU Dracula is actually rumored to be one of the villains in the new MCU Blade movie with Mahershala Ali next year. That's supposed to be a big team-up between Marvel's new supernatural characters like Werewolf by Night, Kit Harington's Black Knight that we saw with the Ebony Blade in the Eternals post-credit scene, and it's the reason why Mahershala Ali's Blade is the voice that you hear in that Eternals post-credit scene. Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal said that it was possible that they would do a Blade Morbius crossover. It just seems weird if they wouldn't do that eventually. But the Morbius movie begins with the title sequence in this custom version of the Morbius logo. His custom logo actually uses purple, similar to the colors of his classic costume. In fact, the purple lined coat that he wears throughout the entire movie is meant to be exactly like his comics costume he wears. The backstory at the beginning of the movie with him being born with this rare genetic condition is similar to his comics backstory. He was born with a condition that he tried to cure through science, leading to him becoming the Morbius character. They changed a few minor details, like he did originally grow up on Greece. He did become a scientist, but it's his backstory with the Matt Smith Milo character, the Lucius Crown character, that's different. Matt Smith is playing a character called Lucian. He changes his name to Milo because every kid that's moved in next to him and died a quick death, he's renamed to Milo because they die so quickly. So Matt Smith is like a changed version of Hunger with the same powers as Morbius. Jared Harris is playing a version of the Emil Nicholas character in the comics. In his backstory, originally, he's the character that Morbius accidentally winds up killing on the boat when he becomes Morbius for the first time. In the movie, it winds up being Matt Smith's Hunger character that winds up killing him. The whole backstory about him combining vampire bat DNA to get his powers is similar to the comics. There's no electroshock therapy in there. In the original story, there was a lot of electroshock therapy as part of that. There was no original vampire bat, that's why a lot of his powers are very different from traditional vampire powers and traditional vampire weaknesses. He appeared for the first time in Spider-Man comics around the time Spider-Man was getting mutated again, getting those 6 arms. Another really cool connection to Spider-Man No Way Home is that when the purple tears in reality appear at the end of that movie and all the classic versions of the multiverse Sinister Six villains start showing up, one of the multiverse characters is that 6-arm version of Spider-Man. As far as I know, though, he did not come from the Venom universe. He just came from another random universe. And if it wasn't clear, the director did clarify a bunch of plot points in the movie days before the movie actually came out, which was kind of funny. He said the events of the Morbius movie do take place in the same universe as the Venom movies, so this does take place after the events of Venom Let There Be Carnage. They directly reference it during the movie. His character did grow up to be a scientist in the comics, going to college in the United States, but he never worked for Horizon Labs in the comics like he does during the movie. Horizon Labs does show up a lot in the more recent Spider-Man comics. Spider-Man worked there briefly, and they were eventually absorbed into Alchemax. Most people know that corporation as the evil, futuristic corporation from the Spider-Man 2099 comics, which will appear during Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse along with Oscar Isaac, also MCU Moon Knight, in his Spider-Man 2099 futuristic version of Nueva York. I guess you could call Spider-Man 2099 and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a variant of MCU Moon Knight. Technically, that would make sense. We meet Martine Bancroft for the first time, who is Morbius's love interest in the comics after he goes to college. In the movie, she starts out as one of his co-workers, another doctor working at Horizon Labs, working on their projects. She eventually winds up learning what Morbius is doing with the vampire bats, and just like in the comics, Martine does wind up getting the same powers that he does, so she'll come back the next time they do a sequel movie, or when they do a big Sinister Six crossover movie with Morbius in it. She whips out the first Daily Bugle edition of the movie. There's at least 3 or 4 during the movie, and the different versions all reference different Spider-Man Easter eggs. The Daily Bugle logo that they use in the movie is from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, so that means that this universe's version of J. Jonah Jameson also works at this print edition of the Daily Bugle. Because this is present day, they also probably have an online broadcast news source too, just like the MCU version of J. Jonah Jameson. The Daily Bugle does kind of wind up being our first legit Spider-Man Easter egg, though. They removed a ton of them that were in the trailers so far, so I'll explain the ones they removed and why they probably did that. The movie did not have the scene of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man costume with him walking by it on the wall with the Tom Holland MCU murder plot points from the Mysterio storyline on top of it. They removed a shot of a bus with an ad for Spider-Man on it. There was a Daily Bugle ad that was running, supposed to say, "Where is Spider-Man?" as if he disappeared recently. There's no truck mentioning Kraven on the side. There was going to be a pastry truck that was run by Kraven's family that would appear during the film. Even though now Sony is filming a Kraven movie with Aaron Taylor Johnson. That's right, MCU Quicksilver is the new Sony Kraven, so post all your multiverse variant memes. They never mention Oscorp in the movie like they do in the trailers. That was actually an Andrew Garfield Amazing Spider-Man Easter egg. It was going to be his version of the logo. In the movie, Tyrese is playing a character from the comics called Simon Stroud. Just like the comic book version, he's an FBI agent on a special task force that hunts supernatural creatures and Spider-Man villains. But in the movie, he tells Morbius that the artificial blood that he created earlier had saved his life during the war in Afghanistan. The artificial arm that they never call out during the film was supposed to have been created by Oscorp. It shows up a lot more during the trailer shots. And even though MCU Vulture did get transported to the Venom universe in the movie during the post-credit scene, originally he was going to be a bigger part of the third act of the movie when Morbius gets arrested and then busts out of prison. But a couple versions of their Daily Bugle throughout the movie mention different Spider-Man villains. So one mentions Rhino and Black Cat, which will show up during the future Sinister Six movies and spin-offs. Another one mentions the Chameleon, who will also show up during the Kraven movie that they're filming right now. So some of those Spider-Man Easter eggs setting up other movies did survive. They explain that this version of Milo comes from a rich family and owns this version of Horizon Labs. He suffers from the same condition as Morbius, so he's been funding his research all these years as they're looking for this cure on the DL. The boat that they wind up chartering for Morbius when he gets his powers is right out of the comics, but the boat in the movie is called the Murnau, which is a reference to the classic German film director F.W. Murnau, most famous for directing Nosferatu, the 1922 adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. A lot of you have also seen the meta Easter egg here too, so fun Sinister Six Spider-Man No Way Home connection in this. Willem Dafoe, who played the Tobey Maguire Green Goblin, also once played a version of Max Schreck in a retelling of that original Murnau story, also starring John Malkovich in that same movie who played a version of the director F.W. Murnau. John Malkovich was also supposed to play the Vulture in Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 4 when they were still going to make that movie. The Easter eggs have come full circle. Just like in the comics, on the boat he winds up killing everyone except for Martine because he doesn't want to hurt her. The only difference there is that Jared Harris's character was there in the comics and he wound up killing him instead of the Hunger character, which is the way it went down in the movie. When Tyrese's FBI task force investigates the accident later on the boat, they mention it's just like the incident in San Francisco. That is a reference directly to the events of Venom Let There Be Carnage. Like I said, they're taking place in the same universe. In the trailer, when he takes down the thugs and sets out that underground lab later in the movie, in the trailers, he tells them, "I am Venom," using his traditional catchphrase, but that catchphrase didn't appear in the actual movie. When Jared Harris's character comes to visit Matt Smith's Milo after the accident happens, he tells him on a scale from 1 to 10, his pain is 11. That's a reference to Doctor Who, Matt Smith, most known for playing the 11th version of the Doctor. I actually did videos for every single Matt Smith Doctor Who episode on my channel a long time ago. You can find them if you go to my channel and search for Doctor Who Emergency Awesome. All the different powers that Morbius gets are right out of the comics. The only minor difference that some of you have asked about who watched that 90s animated Spider-Man series, which is a classic, it's a great TV series, is that in the comics originally, he always drank blood like a regular vampire. When they made that 90s animated series, the censors wouldn't allow him to drink blood on screen because little kids were watching the show, so they made it so that the TV version only sucked out the plasma from people using the hand suckers. That's where the hand suckers came from, just from the TV show. But in the movie, that was the whole reason why they had the character create the artificial blood, so that he seemed like less of a villain, like, oh, I'm trying to survive on this artificial blood. But it's also why that was diminishing returns, so eventually he would always have to drink human blood. He explains that animal blood won't work, and natural human blood will make him stronger than artificial blood. It lasts longer in his system, but it also makes him more aggressive, kind of like Hunger's character, which is why he tries to avoid it as much as possible. He doesn't gain the ability to control bats, but apparently bats do think of him as one of their own and help him when he asks for their help, which is why they attack Hunger at the end of the movie. He has super speed, regeneration, echolocation, he has a measure of super sight, he can fly, but one of his major weaknesses is that when he does run low on blood, he does start to revert back to the weakened state he was in before the experiment. Matt Smith's Hunger character takes one of the spare treatments he created in secret, then kills their nurse at Horizon, blaming Morbius incorrectly. A version of that actually happened in the comics, but it was Martine Bancroft that got blamed by Simon Stroud and then arrested wrongly. When they're interrogating him, they make a bunch of vampire and pop culture references, Dracula references. Like I said, minor connection to MCU Blade, MCU Dracula, Moon Knight, the supernatural characters that Marvel is doing right now. In the trailers, Morbius also makes some Lost Boys jokes. That movie was about a group of vampires, but they cut that scene from the final movie. The reason why holy water doesn't work on him is because he doesn't have any of the traditional weaknesses that classic vampires have. When he's in prison originally, what was supposed to happen is he was going to cross paths with MCU Vulture, who had already been transported from the MCU. If you remember the voiceover in the trailers, Vulture was supposed to encourage him to give in to his baser instincts and break out of prison, and the Vulture was going to use that as an opportunity to break out, but they obviously changed that with new post-credit scenes. The club where Hunger winds up killing those random dudes in the third act is also called the Oriole. The Oriole is a Marvel character. The news station that keeps broadcasting about what happened is a version of New York 1, which is an alternate universe version of the news channel that you see in the MCU Spider-Man films like Spider-Man No Way Home and Spider-Man Far From Home. At the end of the movie, Martine Bancroft does wind up drinking Morbius' blood, turning into a living vampire just like she did in the comics, getting the same powers that he had. The only difference is that in the comics, it was another vampire who had attacked her and gave her those powers. He does wind up using the other bats to kill Matt Smith's Hunger character. In the comics, he was never killed, he just was weakened and then escaped away. But in the first post-credit scene, a purple tear appears over the sky that looks exactly like the one at the end of Spider-Man No Way Home, and they use that to explain that MCU Vulture got transported during Doctor Strange's second spell. I've already done a completely separate video about all the post-credit scenes, so I'll link that in the description below, you can watch that. There's a lot of hand-wavy logic. I don't think that the purple tears in Doctor Strange's spell was supposed to work like that. They use the same bright light effect that they used when Venom was being transported between universes. He says, I hope the food here is better, and because there's no record of this universe's version of Adrian Toomes existing or having been arrested, they have to let MCU Vulture go. Then in the second post-credit scene, after another short time jump, Morbius has apparently been contacted by this MCU Vulture who's been watching his work, being a fan of his, who calls him out to this deserted area. He shows up in a new version of the MCU Vulture suit. The director also talked about this after I posted my post-credit scene video a couple days ago. The director said that he thinks that this version of the Vulture is a resourceful guy, so he just kind of implies that maybe he cobbled together a new version of the Vulture suit in this universe. Even though MCU Vulture is not meant to be an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer, so presumably he would have had to have found another character to create a version of the Vulture suit, but there's no Battle of New York inside the Venom universe, so there's no Chitauri invasion, which means that none of his tech has Chitauri tech in it, like the MCU Vulture suit had in it. So like I said, there's a lot of hand-waving logic in this. But he says a bunch of guys like them should team up and take care of this universe version of Spider-Man. So the reason why a lot of people are upset about this is because they're like, why would he hate Spider-Man because Spider-Man saved his life? Even if he forgot Peter Parker because of the effects of Doctor Strange's spell, he would remember a version of Spider-Man saving his life at some point. So we'll see whatever their logic is once they do a Sinister Six spin-off film, but clearly MCU Vulture is meant to be on that team along with Morbius, probably Venom 2, probably a version of Kraven, and all the other big Sinister Six villains they're doing spin-off movies for in the next couple of years. As far as the version of Spider-Man that exists in this universe, it's either going to wind up being Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or maybe even a live-action version of Miles Morales. Right now, I would love if it were Andrew Garfield because so much of his Amazing Spider-Man 2 featured Morbius Easter eggs, Venom, Symbiote Saga Easter eggs. They were going to do a version of all this stuff that they're doing now back during the Amazing Spider-Man 2 era. But if you spotted any other big Spider-Man Easter eggs in the movie that I didn't talk about during the video, just write them below in the comments. Everyone click here for my brand new Doctor Strange 2 trailer video with new footage, and click here for my brand new Moon Knight Episode 2 trailer video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.